I arrived at my husband's family home just as the sun was sinking behind the Chicago suburbs, painting the brick facades with a soft orange glow. The air carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves mixed with the aroma of roasting meat and sweet tea simmering in the kitchen. The house itself was warm, inviting, filled with echoes of past holidays and laughter, but I felt that familiar chill of invisibility that had been my constant companion for years. I carried my coat in one hand, a small purse in the other, trying to steady the unease twisting in my stomach. The living room was already alive with the low hum of conversation. My mother-in-law presided over the space, the matriarch, her presence commanding attention without a word. Around her, my husband's siblings orbited, their laughter punctuating every anecdote. I could see him standing a few steps away, charming and polished, effortlessly fitting into this circle while I remained on the periphery. I scanned the room, his eldest sister, radiant and self-assured, tracing her dominance with casual remarks. His younger brother, always seeking approval, eyes darting between our mother and each other. I reminded myself to breathe, to play the part expected of me, attentive, helpful, invisible when necessary. The oak dining table was set meticulously, plates gleaming, silverware arranged like soldiers at attention. Old family photos lined the walls, capturing decades of smiles, weddings, and vacations I had no part in planning. I helped lay out the napkins, pour iced tea into glasses, and arrange the centerpiece, silently noting the power dynamics embedded in the smallest details. I was, as always, the facilitator, the one keeping everything smooth while being allowed no voice of consequence. As everyone gathered around the table, the chatter shifted toward lighter topics. Plans for the weekend, the latest neighborhood gossip, harmless banter, or so it seemed. My husband's brother, the one who would later make the cutting remark, leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eye. There was a subtle tension I recognized immediately. He relied on me in ways no one would admit, financially dependent, yet poised to mock me publicly without consequence. My husband smiled at the conversation, polite but disengaged with me, his hands folded neatly on his lap. The main course arrived: roast, vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. Forks clinked against plates, glasses shifted with the weight of conversation. And then it came, the joke. My brother-in-law chuckled loudly, leaning forward with an air of feigned intimacy that made every eye turn to him. "If you vanished today, we'd probably celebrate," he said. Laughter erupted immediately, sharp and unrestrained. My husband chuckled, polite but absent-minded. Even my mother-in-law gave a small, approving nod, as though this public erasure were an amusing insight into the family dynamics. The laughter hit me like a physical blow, felt the iced tea tremble in my glass, a ripple running through my hands, tightening around the napkin. I cataloged every smile, every glance that darted over me with amusement or oblivion. Years of subtle dismissals, financial dependence, and social invisibility coalesced into this one moment. The joke wasn't funny. It was a mirror reflecting my own sidelined role in their carefully curated world. I didn't respond with outrage. I couldn't afford to. Instead, I let a small, deliberate pause stretch between his words and my reply. "Interesting theory," I said, even-toned, letting it hang in the air. Their laughter faltered for a fraction of a second. Curiosity mingled with confusion at my unexpected composure. Beneath the table, my phone vibrated softly. I glanced down to see a large payment confirmation from a client, a quiet, tangible reminder that the weight they dismissed me carrying had consequences they couldn't even imagine. My husband's smile remained, maintaining the fragile peace while saying nothing to defend me. I nodded to myself, acknowledging the hidden leverage they assumed didn't exist. Flashbacks flitted across my mind as I held my composure. covering the family cruise last summer, co-signing loans that no one credited me for, silently ensuring the household ration of family. I lingered by the living room window, peering through the soft glow of lamplight. There, perched on the mantel, was a recent family photograph, everyone in smiling alignment except me. I had organized and funded that reunion, coordinated the logistics, and even covered expenses so the family could gather. Yet in this image, I was conspicuously absent, a ghost among the living. The realization hit with the subtle cruelty of truth. When people pretend you aren't there long enough, you start believing them. The joke from the dinner table, sharp and humiliating, now seemed echoed in this silent photograph, a symbolic confirmation that my presence was optional in the world they curated. I re-entered the house quietly, slipping past the laughter that had dulled since dinner. My energy was different now, calm, measured, detached, but far from defeated. Conversations continued around me, but I responded with vague politeness, allowing the silence to fill the gaps I normally rush to occupy. I didn't linger to help clear dishes or refill glasses, every omission a tiny act of resistance. They misread my quietness as moodiness, oblivious to the subtle shift that my withdrawal created. The balance of power at the table was changing, and they didn't even know it. Thoughts spun through my mind as I moved through the familiar rooms. I had been the one keeping the household afloat, the invisible linchpin. Bills, arrangements, emergency favors, all silently maintained by me. Cassian, my brother-in-law, had borrowed money countless times without acknowledgement, yet relied on me implicitly. This dynamic had persisted only because I remained unseen, compliant, and ready to absorb the chaos they refused to manage. For the first time, I considered pulling back, not out of spite, but for my own self-preservation. Disappearing quietly could be the only way to make my presence undeniable. Sometimes disappearing is the only way to be seen. Later, in the solitude of my car, I drove along the familiar streets, each turn bringing memories of younger days when I laughed at jokes like the one tonight, mistaking them for affection or harmless banter. Experience had sharpened my perspective. What once seemed tolerable now tasted bitter, a warning I could no longer ignore. I let the rhythm of the tires on asphalt mirror my thoughts, clarity replacing discomfort. The Rasa quiet night allowed me to trace the contours of a plane without articulating it, sensing that tonight marked the start of a shift in my own narrative. Pulling into my driveway, I reached for my phone, tapping out a short, deliberate message to cancel the automatic rent payment for Cassian's apartment. No announcement, no explanation, just a small, controlled disruption. A quiet test of the ripples my absence could create. A subtle rebellion that would go unnoticed on the surface, yet spoke volumes beneath. If I'm going to vanish, let's see what happens when I take the ground with me. The morning after the dinner, the apartment felt unusually still, almost suspended in a weightless quiet that pressed against my temples. I moved through the rooms with careful, deliberate motions, making the bed, straightening the kitchen counter, each action measured but devoid of comfort. The space reflected me perfectly, organized yet cold, a place to survive rather than to live. I opened my laptop and checked the bills, pausing briefly over the canceled auto payment for Cassian's apartment, a small but deliberate assertion of control that gave me a quiet satisfaction. From the neighboring apartment, soft music drifted, reminding me of birthdays past, when I had celebrated alone, believing laughter could fill spaces where love was absent. I pulled out a box of letters and mementos, unopened for years, and set them gently on the table. As I unfolded a letter dated back to the funeral of my grandparent, memories surged forward with clarity. I was 24, standing amid relatives in the polished church hall, my hands trembling from a grief that had barely room to breathe. Cassian had found a way to blame me publicly for some logistical misstep, a document misplaced, a delay mismanaged. The words, sharp and deliberate, cut deeper than the loss itself. No one defended me. My parents offered gentle murmurs, but no shield. I learned then that my role was the scapegoat, the one who bore the weight of mistakes that weren't entirely mine. I suppressed outrage to keep the peace, to maintain a fragile illusion of harmony, but the humiliation sank into my bones, unyielding. Returning to the present, my hands shook slightly as I discovered a sealed envelope tucked between the old photographs, an unopened message from my sister. Her handwriting was familiar, yet the delay had rendered it almost foreign. I broke the seal, unfolding the paper carefully. Inside was an apology, a confession that Cassian had deliberately obstructed details regarding a family inheritance. My sister admitted she had been too afraid to confront it back then. The betrayal was colder than neglect, meticulously coordinated to leave me unknowing, vulnerable. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing inward as I absorbed the quiet cruelty of years rendered invisible. But the quiet click of the study door closing behind me felt heavier than I expected, the weight of the evening pressing down like an unseen hand on my shoulders. The room greeted me with its familiar stillness, shelves of books lining the walls, the faint scent of my mother's perfume, lingering in the corners, and a framed photo from childhood staring back at me as if judging. I sank into the leather chair and let the silence wrap around me, a thin layer of comfort cushioning the turmoil roiling inside. My fingers trembled as they brushed over the envelope I had found hours earlier, the one that shifted everything I thought I knew. The paper felt fragile, almost conspiratorial, as if holding secrets too heavy to speak aloud. I unfolded it slowly, reading the apology and confession with a careful precision, savoring each word that revealed deliberate omission, intentional erasure, and the quiet collusion I had never imagined. Every line was a revelation and a dagger all at once, a combination of grief and clarity twisting deep in my chest. Memories came unbidden, vivid flashes of my childhood and the stories my mother used to tell, the little moments where truth was bent to fit a narrative that excluded me. I remembered her voice saying I was never really there, and I juxtaposed that with photos, journals, and fragments of letters that contradicted her words. Did she truly misremember, or had she helped rewrite my story to suit the family's comfort? The betrayal stung with an intensity I hadn't anticipated. Anger and heartbreak collided, leaving me raw and unsteady. The very person who should have been my anchor had participated in my erasure, and the realization seared a bitter line across my understanding of family. I leaned over the letter, analyzing its date, the handwriting, the subtle motivations behind sending it years ago, yet never confronting the truth openly. Its purpose became clear: acknowledgement without challenge, a quiet admission that preserved appearances. I rifled through drawers, scanning old bank statements, tax records, and emails, each document linking together to illuminate the extent of the deception. My hands paused on a half-erased legal codicil, a document that had altered my stake in the family's will, hidden away and forgotten, or intentionally buried. A chill ran down my spine. The erasure was not just emotional, it had been codified. They hadn't simply hidden a letter, they had reshaped history itself to exclude me. A surge of resolve overtook me as I began drafting questions for my sister and mother. A brief, pointed text ready to be sent. We need to talk about what's in this letter. I collected handwriting samples, scanned photos, compared dates, and documented discrepancies. A meticulous catalog of betrayal. In my mind, a vow took shape. I would not allow myself to be gaslit again. I rehearsed the words I would speak, the calm and factual tone I would maintain, knowing they expected an emotional outburst. I would be steady, unflinching, a presence that refused to be diminished. I repeated my grandmother's old adage, murmured into the quiet room, "When the storm is loudest, that's when you listen, not speak." As I began to lock the file drawer, the sharp knock at the front door made my heart leap. I paused, listening to the muted echo of each rap. Peering through the peephole, I saw Mavis, her expression unreadable under the dim light of the porch. "We need to talk, now," she said, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. My pulse quickened, but I stood still, absorbing the weight of the moment. The silence of the house seemed to stretch, holding its breath, waiting for the next move. So, the silence would break tonight, but for whom? The question lingered in my mind as I stepped forward, opening the door just enough to let her in while keeping my resolve intact. Every careful step, every measured breath reinforced the understanding that this was no longer about what they thought of me. It was about what I would allow them to do. The night, long and uncertain, had only just begun to reveal its truths. The soft glow from the chandelier cast long shadows across the dining room as I stepped inside, every footfall amplifying the tension that seemed to pulse in the warm California evening air. The room smelled faintly of roasted vegetables and baked bread, an inviting aroma that contrasted sharply with the invisible weight pressing down on me. Subtle glances swept across the table as I approached, whispers fading like the echo of distant thunder. My seat had been chosen carefully, awkwardly placed between my brother-in-law and a distant cousin, a silent statement in the choreography of family hierarchy. I paused for a moment, catching the way some eyes flicked toward me and immediately away, and I drew a steadying breath, determined to maintain composure despite the foreboding feeling curling in my stomach. As the first dishes were passed, the undercurrent of unspoken tension surfaced. My brother-in-law tossed an offhand joke about my absence, and the laughter rippled around the table, sharp and hollow. Some faces twitched with discomfort, others reveling in the performance, feeding the cruel delight. I sat quietly, cataloging every glance, every smirk, every almost imperceptible eye roll. Memories of past dinners where I had been dismissed, laughed at, or ignored resurfaced, each one a notch in the ledger of quiet humiliation. I didn't speak, letting the words hang in the air, my mind taking note of what to confront and what to observe. The emotional tide inside me fluctuated, hurt, embarrassment, and a simmering anger tempered by strategic restraint. I counted each slight, each moment, recognizing the power dynamics unfolding like a game I had no choice but to learn. Then, amidst the subtle barbs and polite smiles, an unexpected ally appeared. My cousin's eyes met mine across the table, a quiet acknowledgement, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. The look carried weight, understanding, empathy, a shared recognition of the injustices I had endured. I remembered moments from the past, small instances where this cousin had silently observed the family's behavior, never intervening openly, but never failing to notice either. My resolve strengthened, a spark of hope mingling with caution. We exchanged a few words, carefully measured, hinting at shared secrets and observations. It was enough to remind me I was not entirely alone in noticing the patterns, and it set the stage for the subtle pushback that had begun to form in my mind. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet solidarity, the reassurance that good. Fear and empowerment clashed within me as I read, the delicate balance between exposure and restraint occupying my thoughts. Timing, I realized, was critical. How I chose to respond, if at all, could shift the entire dynamic that had been meticulously orchestrated for years. The air around the table seemed heavier, charged with the implications of a truth long hidden. My resolve solidified. The tension had peaked, but the hidden truth now demanded attention, its presence altering the game silently, yet irrevocably. I sat at the table, the folded notes still clutched in my hand, my pulse quickening as I absorbed the implications of what it contained. The casual din of the family around me, clinking cutlery, quiet chatter, and the occasional forced laugh felt like an overlay on my own internal storm. Every word, every glance seemed charged with new meaning. The inheritance, the subtle manipulations, the carefully preserved reputations. It all suddenly made sense, like a map unfolding across years of hidden agendas. I knew I couldn't react openly, not yet. Composure was essential. I set the note aside, letting my exterior remain calm, while my mind calculated the risks, the benefits, and the timing of any move. The family noticed the unusual focus in my eyes, and the tension in the room thickened, unspoken yet undeniable. Then he spoke, a remark meant to provoke, sharp-edged and pointed directly at me. My brother-in-law, ever so subtle in his cruelty, chose the perfect moment in front of distant relatives, his words carrying weight beyond their casual delivery. Gasps and soft chuckles rippled around the table, the laughter punctuated by the occasional raised eyebrow. Inside, my anger simmered like molten steel, but my face remained carefully neutral. I counted each reaction, measured each pause, and began to plot my response. Timing would matter. Striking too soon could expose me, but waiting too long might let the advantage slip away. A quiet adrenaline surged, a pulse of awareness sharpening my mind for what was to come. I found my opportunity shortly after, subtle and precise. When a small misattribution of credit came up in conversation, I corrected it with careful phrasing, asserting my role without aggression. I watched the family's reactions, some faces registering shock, others silent acknowledgement of truth, a few masking their surprise with polite nods. Satisfaction flickered within me, tempered by the careful awareness of possible consequences. Every word, every inflection was deliberate, an assertion of authority without tipping into open conflict. The quick bursts of dialogue, mixed with reflective pauses, became a rhythm, a dance of engagement and observation, allowing me to test boundaries while preserving strategic calm. Eyes met across the table with my previously acknowledged ally, a subtle glance carrying acknowledgement and understanding. We exchanged no words, but the silent alignment was unmistakable. Inwardly, I scanned the room, noting loyalties, vulnerabilities, and hidden complicities. Every gesture, every hesitation, every glance offered data, which I stored and analyzed for later moves. I maintained decorum outwardly, but my mind worked with a precision born from years of careful observation. Patience balanced with determination, excitement tempered by caution. I was learning, adapting, and preparing while appearing merely to participate in polite conversation. As the evening progressed, a quiet discovery shifted the game entirely. A discreetly recorded audio message revealed the unmistakable evidence of past manipulations, voices, and admissions preserved in a form that could not be denied. My chest tightened with anticipation as I listened, the leverage it provided instantly clear. Every possible outcome flashed through my mind, how I could use it, when I could reveal it, and what caution must accompany each step. The pulse of suspense and readiness surged, a controlled energy that demanded careful planning. Now I held proof undeniable, the foundation for the next moves in the intricate web of family dynamics. The confrontation had escalated, the pieces aligned, and the real strategy was only beginning. The weight of the evening pressed against my shoulders as I held the recording in my hand. a quiet, undeniable proof of the manipulations that had threaded through years of my family's gatherings. I had felt the sting of jokes, the subtle dismissals, and the covert slights for so long, but this was different. The deception was laid bare in crisp, unarguable clarity. I felt a rush of controlled excitement as I tucked the evidence into my bag, my mind immediately plotting the delicate orchestration required to wield it without alerting anyone prematurely. My eyes scanned the living room, taking in the subtle postures, the whispered side glances, and the faint tension rippling beneath the polite chatter. Who was loyal? Who might backstab? Who could be swayed to my side? Each nuance was critical. I allowed myself a quiet breath, steadying the pulse of anticipation that surged through me. I watched him, my brother-in-law, closely, noting the way he leaned slightly too far back in his chair, the confidence masking an undercurrent of overestimation. Every gesture, every smirk, every exaggerated laugh was data. I thought back to past gatherings, remembering which strategies had provoked which responses, anticipating how each slight or correction might shift the delicate balance in my favor. Subtle cues were everything. The arch of an eyebrow, a delayed glance, the hesitancy before speech. I planned my conversation, my interjections, even the timing of laughter, all to hint at my newfound awareness without signaling my true advantage. Patience and measured pacing became my allies as I read the room with calculated caution, the air thick with suspense and the thrill of quiet strategy. My first opportunity arose when a conversation turned to shared responsibilities. A misattribution of effort, a credit that had always been redirected away from me, offered the perfect opening. I interjected with careful wording, asserting my presence and contributions without overt confrontation. Heads turned, eyes widened, and a subtle ripple of surprise traveled across the table. Some faces displayed admiration, others masked irritation with forced smiles. Inside, I allowed myself a small, controlled satisfaction, noting each reaction and storing it for future consideration. My outward calm, the measured inflection of my voice, conveyed intelligence and restraint, even as a simmering anger fueled my confidence. Each exchange, each brief dialogue, was punctuated with reflective pauses, a dance between engagement and internal calculation. A glance from my cousin confirmed an unspoken alliance. No words were exchanged, yet the alignment was unmistakable. We shared understanding through silence, a tacit coordination that would fortify my position. I observed the responses of other family members, assessing potential threats and vulnerabilities, cataloging each reaction in meticulous detail. Strategic influence could be exerted through casual comments, subtle gestures, or the careful reminder of past events, methods that kept the advantage hidden while signaling strength. My optimism was cautious but genuine, the sense of reclaiming control, even in small increments, strengthened my resolve. Every shift, every movement, became a part of a greater plan, a choreography of power and perception. As the night deepened, I left an implied warning in my tone and posture, a signal that my awareness had shifted and that subtle retaliation was underway. The family sensed the undercurrent, the air grew taut with unease. My brother-in-law, once so assured, fidgeted slightly, the first signs of discomfort betraying his realization that the game had changed. I allowed a faint, imperceptible smile as I observed, savoring the subtle triumph of this initial psychological victory. The tension in the room hinted at more to come, a prelude to the deliberate maneuvers that would unfold in the chapters ahead. Tonight, I had made my presence felt, and the quiet reshaping of power had begun. I sat at the head of the dining table, evidence in hand, feeling the tension coil around me like a living thing. The evening air was thick, heavy with polite chatter that trembled under the weight of unspoken truths. I had rehearsed this moment countless times in my mind, parsing each word, measuring the impact of every phrase. My heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with controlled determination. Tonight, I would finally let the truth surface, and I would do so deliberately, with calm precision. I scanned the room. My brother-in-law leaned back, a smug confidence in his posture, unaware of the leverage I now held. Eyes flicked from face to face, gauging who would falter and who might support me silently. Each subtle shift, every nervous glance, became a map for my strategy. The atmosphere bristled, taut as the string of a violin ready to snap. I began softly, recounting moments of past manipulations, weaving them into a narrative that no one could easily dismiss. I presented the evidence, meticulously organized, factual, undeniable. The room froze, murmurs bubbled quietly before being swallowed in the stunned silence. Gasps punctuated the air, some eyes widened in disbelief, others narrowed with unease. My voice remained calm, each word measured, carrying authority without aggression. I watched reactions with hawk-like precision. My mother's fingers clutched her napkin, my brother-in-law's jaw tightened imperceptibly, and a cousin shifted uncomfortably, realizing for the first time that the facade of family control had cracks. Every revelation landed with quiet force, a subtle quake that rattled the table of lies I had endured for years. He attempted to deflect, a practiced deflection mingled with forced humor, but I anticipated it. Each excuse, each feigned misunderstanding, met with precise counterpoints. I presented corroborating evidence, emails, letters, photographs, silent witnesses to his repeated attempts to undermine me. The tension grew, a taut rope pulling tight between us. Some relatives shifted uneasily, caught in the gravity of my calm, methodical exposure. I allowed small pauses, letting the words linger in the room, magnifying their impact. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but my exterior remained composed, projecting the authority that years of suppression had honed. Every assertion was a controlled strike, a measured claim of space I had always been denied. Then came the final revelation, the twist I had held back, undeniable proof of his long-term manipulation, a record that shifted credibility entirely in my favor. The room collectively inhaled, eyes darting between me and the documents that laid bare his duplicity. I stated, plainly and firmly, the value of my contributions, my intelligence, the work that had kept certain family affairs afloat. Allies, subtle in their gestures, offered quiet acknowledgement. Nods exchanged looks, reinforcing the credibility of my revelations. The balance of power had shifted, imperceptibly yet irrevocably, and I could feel the first tremors of victory beneath the weight of the room's stunned attention. The aftermath settled slowly. Some family members stared at each other, recalculating alliances and loyalties. My brother-in-law's composure faltered, his previous smugness now replaced with an uneasy tightness around his mouth. I exhaled quietly, knowing that tonight had altered the dynamics permanently, though not all wounds would heal immediately. The table, once a stage for my silenced presence, had become a platform for authority reclaimed. I sat back, pulse steady, allowing the room to absorb the full measure of truth. My mind traced the steps ahead, ready for the final chapter of reckoning, understanding that while the confrontation had reached its apex, the resolution remained just beyond tonight's threshold. The room felt different after the confrontation. Even the air seemed lighter, as if the weight of long-held grievances had lifted slightly, leaving a fragile calm in its place. Family members shifted in their seats, exchanging glances that suggested reflection, hesitation, and for some, quiet remorse. My brother-in-law avoided my eyes, his usual smirk gone, replaced by attention that had not been there before. Others muttered apologies under their breath or offered hesitant nods, and I received these gestures with a composed acknowledgement, aware of the delicate balance between pride and humility. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to feel the subtle satisfaction of having reclaimed my voice and asserted my value. Relief mingled with a lingering edge of frustration. Old patterns die hard, but the sense of moral equilibrium had begun to settle. I moved carefully among those who had supported me, quietly rebuilding bridges without theatrical gestures. Conversations were measured, each word chosen to clarify intentions and dissolve misunderstandings. I apologized where necessary, not out of weakness, but to restore harmony where past slights had caused fissures. Younger relatives, previously observers, now engaged more freely, sensing a change in tone. The atmosphere began to warm incrementally, laughter threading its way back into the room, tentative yet genuine. I felt a quiet joy in seeing trust rekindled, the knowledge that empathy and patience could coexist with firmness and self-respect. Later, I retreated to the backyard for a moment of solitude, the night air cool against my skin, a gentle contrast to the charged energy inside. I reflected on the lessons learned, how boundaries had to be maintained, the necessity of vigilance, and the power of strategic action. Memories of past sacrifices surfaced, not as burdens, but as markers of growth. I acknowledged my resilience, the intelligence applied in navigating complex family dynamics, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing truth and justice recognized. Emotional depth mingled with empowerment, a cathartic release that allowed me to appreciate the journey, not merely the destination. As the evening progressed, tangible outcomes became apparent. Contributions I had long made, organizing family events, managing shared responsibilities, were acknowledged with subtle nods, private comments, and quiet praise. The brother-in-law faced repercussions aligned with his actions, measured yet inevitable, reinforcing a sense of justice. Public recognition, small but sincere, underscored the moral resolution. Observing these outcomes, I felt an affirmation of fairness without the need for grand declarations, proof that integrity had its due reward. Finally, I allowed myself to consider the future. Plans, personal and familial, unfolded in my mind with a clarity previously clouded by anxiety and suppression. The night sky stretched overhead, expansive and open, reflecting possibilities rather than past constraints. Relationships could continue to mend, new opportunities awaited, and the lessons of resilience and assertiveness would guide the path ahead. Gratitude settled within me, calm optimism replacing lingering tension. The family had been reshaped not through vengeance, but through clarity, courage, and self-respect. As I stepped inside, ready to join the last conversations of the evening, I felt the weight of the past lift completely, leaving space for growth, connection, and hope.